guys, my name is Catherine Pabon. I am the host of Z-Files podcast, where we bring your curiosity to our conversation. Today, I have a political segment, Behind the Ballot, where I have a special guest, Janet Jackson. Would you like to introduce yourself and what you're running for?
Sure. I'm Janet Jackson. I'm a candidate for judge of the Court of Common Pleas of Monroe County. I've been a lawyer in Stroudsburg for more than 35 years. I went to King's College. Since we're here at a college, I feel like I should tell you that. I went to King's College, which is where Tara Probst went to college as well.
My brother went to King's, too.
Yeah. I took a criminal justice major initially, and then had a double major in political science and a minor in philosophy because I found I really liked philosophy once I started taking a few courses and was starting to think about law and logic and things that you can learn from philosophy were good for law. I went to Dickinson School of Law. I got a really nice award at graduation that was voted on by all of the faculty, and that was an award for the person showing the highest standards of the legal profession, sort of an ethics award.
Congratulations.
Yeah, and it was really, really exciting at the time.
Yeah, of course.
And I've went to a federal clerkship in Wilkes-Barre for 1 year after law school, and then I came to Stroudsburg and was the first full-time public defender here, and I've been here ever since, doing a lot of criminal defense work and a lot of civil trials and kind of anything that gets you into the courtroom I've been doing, and I really like it. And I've always liked being an advocate for my clients, but now I feel like I'm ready to do something more for the community, because two of our most experienced judges are finishing at the same time. It's sort of unusual for there to be two openings at the same time, but that did happen once before. Judge Stephen Higgins and Judge David Williamson went on the bench at the same time. So this is the second time in my career that this has happened in Monroe County. Feel like I'm ready to do something more, and I'm hoping that the voters think so too.
Yeah. So you've handled everything from juvenile cases to death penalty trials. How does that experience uniquely prepare you for the bench?
Well, I think that a larger portion of the work of the Court of Common Pleas is the criminal list.
Right.
And I have the most experience of anybody that's running overall, but I also have the most experience in criminal. And, many people who get to serve on a jury in our community are seeing criminal trials because there are a lot more criminal trials than there are civil trials. Yeah. Most civil cases settle. There's a lot of work before they settle for the judges, and ultimately Judge Jonathan Mark will be the president judge come January of 2026, and he'll decide what each of the new judges is going to be doing, and he'll do what he thinks is best for the county, and he'll try to make sure that people have similar workloads. And I've had multiple trials with Judge Mark over the years. I've had multiple trials with Judge Worthington, who's now taken senior status. I've had multiple trials with Judge Zulik, who is ready to finish. So yeah, and when you try cases, you have to be prepared to ask the right questions to select your jury. You have to make objections sometimes during jury selection if perhaps the prosecutor is trying to eliminate all the people of a certain ethnic background or of a certain race. Then you have to make certain objections and be prepared to cite case law and to make a record so that the judge can decide whether to grant your objection or not, but you also make a record because your client may need to file an appeal later on. Those are all things that you learn by actually trying cases. I know that the other people who are running are all talking about their experience as well, and they are all experienced in different ways, but my experience actually choosing juries, presenting evidence, defending, proposing jury instructions, listening to jury instructions, making objections during a trial if they're appropriate. It's it's hard to explain it if you've not experienced it, but it's a lot of technical detail that goes into a trial. The death penalty case that I tried a few years ago, there were probably 500 exhibits, at least from the Commonwealth, of every different kind, from guns to pieces of a building to ammunition to certain items that were found in the person's home from a search warrant. You have to keep track of that information, and you also have to be prepared to make legal arguments with respect to certain types of evidence, in addition to listening to the witnesses when they're testifying, and if you're cross-examining them, being prepared to cross-examine them. It's what I've been doing for my whole career, and I didn't start off doing something like a death penalty case because I would never have been ready. But over the years, I've handled every kind of case. I've handled lots of misdemeanor cases, lots of felony cases. I represented the man who was convicted of shooting a trooper on Route 33 a number of years ago. Really, really distressing case in terms of the emotions and the damage that was done.
Yeah.
And I've just handled every kind of case that I can expect to see in the Court of Common Pleas. I mean, I've never done a medical malpractice case, but I've done other civil cases. I've done depositions of doctors in many cases. Those aren't done in the courtroom, but that's the kind of thing that a common pleas judge is going to see and review and make determinations as to what's admissible and what's not admissible. Right. And when I worked as a law clerk, before I became a lawyer, or before I knew that I had passed the bar and came here to work, I was helping the judge make decisions about evidence and writing opinions and handling his correspondence that was coming in a lot of times from people that were in prison who were filing civil rights actions or filing some type of habeas corpus appeals. So, I've just had a lot of exposure to a lot of different kinds of things that will happen before me if I get elected as judge.
And you feel like you truly are, out of all the candidates, the one that took the step-by-steps that would lead you to be most prepared for this position?
I do. I mean, I have, I've just had at least 10 more years experience than my closest competitor in terms of time. But it's not really about time, because I could have been a lawyer who was only reviewing contracts or writing wills. But I've not been that. I've been a person who's handled a lot of different kinds of cases. I have handled will challenge cases where someone in a family was trying to keep a particular young man who I had previously represented this young man in a workers' compensation case, and he worked at the Burnley Workshop here. I don't know if you're familiar with the Burnley Workshop, but it's a place for developmentally disabled people to have jobs, and I represented him in a pro bono capacity because he didn't have very much in terms of earnings. Nice. But later, somebody in his family tried to keep him from getting his share of his grandfather's estate when his grandfather died.
And you were representing him or the family member? I
was representing him to keep them from denying him his share of his grandfather's estate, and I was successful in that case, and it was very rewarding. Again, it was not it wasn't economically remunerating for me, but I was very glad to have done it, and it was I always get things from my cases, whether it's what I'm getting paid or whether it's just knowing that I've helped somebody who was not the right kind of person for anyone to be taking advantage of.
So in this scenario, when you're closely tied to cases, such as having a follow-up case with him again, and then just being an advocate, how do you separate your emotion from cases and the work, or do you feel like it's a power to be emotionally connected?
Well, I think that First of all, I think it's a great question because you have to set some kind of boundaries in every case. You can't just throw yourself emotionally into every case. But I also think that my ability to communicate, especially to a jury, how much I believe in my client is, I think, one of the ways that I've been very successful in jury trials. And I'm careful about which cases I take to trial, and I often am giving clients the advice that they shouldn't take a case to trial, that the story that they're trying to tell is not a story that I think a jury is going to believe, nor would I believe it if I were the person making the determination. So once I've made the determination that I really think that my client is innocent, then I'm really invested, and I think that my emotional investment helps me to communicate to the jury that this is the right decision is the decision I'm arguing for. So when I said I really like being an advocate, I do, and I think that there's probably some of my clients who would prefer that I wouldn't be running to be a judge, but at the same time, many of my colleagues and many people who have known me my whole life, or my family and my friends, have been asking me for years, why aren't you running for judge? Why don't you run for judge? And I usually said, judge not, or you shall be judged, somewhat jokingly, but I like the role of protecting someone or advocating for someone. But at the same time, fair judges who are patient, judges who are willing to take the time that's necessary to really understand what's happened between two parties before coming to a decision. I think that's a gift, and I'm pretty sure I have it, and I'm really ready to take that role, the role of the person who's listening and applying the law and making the determination as to what justice is in a particular case, because it does change from case to case.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And then for the audience or potential voters, how would you walk them through your process of neutrality if you become elected?
Yeah, well, I think that's been an interesting question that's come up a lot during the campaign. The things that have been happening nationally, where enormous amounts of money are invested in certain judicial campaigns. I believe Wisconsin would be the most recent example. We do start to question the integrity and the fairness of the court when certain parties feel that they have a reason to donate so much money to a particular candidate because they think they can guess or control what that person's going to do as a judge. And I mentioned before that many people want to know, are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican? They want to know what your leanings are. And our Code of Judicial Conduct is very specific in terms of not letting us comment on anything that potentially could be a case that we would have in the future. And I don't have any desire to do that. Quite frankly, people ask me often, well, what do you think about this case or this thing that I saw on Suits? That's another thing a lot of people ask me. And I usually say, I've had cases that, back when we were getting a lot more newspaper coverage, that seemed to get it not really right in terms of what I thought was happening in the courtroom and maybe what the jury thought at the end. And I think that juries are a great tool. And I think that juries really, you've got 12 people with different points of view. Some people notice one piece of evidence and give it a lot of attention, and another person might see another one. And then when they start talking to try to make the decision, it becomes clear what the group thinks is the most important evidence, and that's the evidence that they rely on if they can to come to a decision. So when someone wants me to comment on something that maybe I've read an article about, or maybe I've seen a television, coverage of, that's not enough. I mean, the nuances of how people talk and what they say and whether their eyes are shifty when they're saying it, there's lots of reasons that juries make the determinations that they make. after they listen to the witnesses. And I love being a lawyer. I love our system of justice. And while I've certainly both won and lost cases over the years, I've never really questioned the jury process. I think that jurors get it right, and they take their job seriously, in my experience. So if I'm a judge, I will be treasuring the jury in the role of the jury, and I know that a lot of people come to court really distressed about having to be involved in a jury, and I think that the thing I would want jurors to know if they were coming into my courtroom is sometimes the case settles right when everybody has to look the jurors in the eye, and their presence can maybe help the case get resolved, even if it's not by a verdict. At the same time, every person who's either been the victim in a car accident or who's been accused of something has a right to have their day in court and to be heard and to be treated with dignity, even if at the end you're not going to rule for them, whether it's the jury making that decision or the judge. So I think that people being treated with dignity is probably the thing that matters the most to me when I'm talking about a judge. I've been in front of lots of different judges, lots of different jurisdictions, not just in Monroe County, and sometimes I know within a minute that someone is a great judge just by the way they're talking to a person who's been brought in chains, who doesn't have a lawyer, who doesn't have anyone to advocate for them, but they're treated with dignity by judges who really recognize what their role is, which is not to be either a prosecutor or a defender, but a person who's going to be neutral and give the person their day in court.
And then one thing that you've created, which is a fairy tale trials, putting characters like Goldilocks on trial to teach kids about law. What was the inspiration of that?
Well, I can't really say that I know what was the inspiration as much that it was a group of people in the Bar Association, and I was part of that initial group. And the idea was, we were starting to celebrate Law Day every May, and the opportunity to bring some young people into the courthouse in a fun, educational way came up, and it may be that it was done in another county before it was done in our county, but I feel like we were maybe the beginning of it.
I was selected to go, so I was like one of those kids.
Oh, really? Yeah. So when you were in 5th grade, probably, right? Yeah, sure. And I remember some of those trials really well, and I always talk about the Goldilocks one because I think it's one that even probably 3rd graders or 2nd graders could understand that you're not allowed to go into somebody else's house that didn't invite you, and you're not allowed to eat their porridge and break their chair and sleep in their bed. And so it was really fun. I was a prosecutor in that case, and there was the 5th graders were sitting in the jury box, and they made the decision that Goldilocks was guilty, as I thought they would, and and it was fun. And they do different things every year, but I really like the classic fairy tales because I think they're always good and evil kind of stories, and
not too complex,
right? Yeah, I don't know about Hansel and Gretel, might be too scary, but I'm also just really a great lover of children's books, and my mother worked at a bookstore until she passed away. I'm
sorry.
Quite a while ago, but my kids, when they were little, always wanted to know, Mom, why do we always have to give people books? Why don't we ever give them anything else? And
books are informative.
And books to me are just, what if they miss this one? This is a great book. We and I think my kids all agree with that now, especially now that they're grown up and seeing some other people reading the same books that they were reading when they were little, and then they recognize them. But anyhow, I just love books, and I pretty much almost don't ever talk to anybody for more than a half an hour without making a book recommendation to them, adults and children. But anyhow.
What would you recommend right now?
A book for you?
Yes.
One of my favorites, and I've given it to people when they're either graduating from college or graduating from high school, is Walden on Wheels.
Walden on Wheels?
Yeah, and I don't think I can come up with the author's name, but he was a student who lived in a van surreptitiously on, I believe it was Duke's campus, while he got his postgraduate degree, because he was trying to save money, and he was really focused on not having a lot of debt when he came out of school. So it's a kind of just a great book about adventure, because he put together this van and was eating ramen and joined a gym, so he had a place to take a shower. But I mean, I like the lesson that it gives about kind of living however you need to live so that you can do the things you love to do. So if you have to, even if you have to live in a very small place, you can make it pretty wonderful.
Yeah, eventually become big
Yes.
into what you want. So courts across Pennsylvania are facing backlogs, especially in civil and family divisions. What would you do from the bench to help move cases forward while ensuring fairness in the process?
Well, I think that in Monroe County, during COVID, we really did a lot of things to try to keep the backlog from getting too terrible.
Yeah.
When a lot of courts really weren't doing any jury trials, we still kept doing them. And I tried a case at the Sherman Theater on stage with Judge Mark. Judge Mark was the judge, and he's a former mayor of Stroudsburg, so it felt like almost like a history lesson being on stage at the Sherman. I was in a play when I was in high school, so this was my first reappearance on stage, and it was really, they rented the theater in order to keep trials going, especially because we also had our courthouse under construction at the time, and there were a lot of challenges to getting cases moved through the system. But with respect to family law specifically, I think that especially custody cases, things happen very fast in the life of a child, and making sure that if for instance a parent is asking to move to a different jurisdiction, I guess they don't always call it jurisdiction. We call it jurisdiction, but when they want to move to someplace else,
city.
and they have to make decisions about where the child's going to be in school, those kind of things have to happen timely, or lives are just being, maybe someone loses a job because they can't move because we don't have a decision yet from the judge. I think that getting our full complement of judges will help, and I think that keeping yourself as a judge on track to make sure decisions get made promptly. And I think that that's one of the harder parts of being a judge, but I think that it's essential to our system of justice working. If you ask for some type of remedy from the court and it gets scheduled 4 months later, depending on what kind of problem you're having, that's a very unfair situation. For example, maybe someone's living in the apartment that you own and you're not getting any rent, and you can't get a hearing for a really long time. That's a great burden to the person who's trying to re-rent their apartment. On the other hand, certain things like that, those backlogs started because of COVID, and there was a time when they really weren't moving people out of apartments even if they weren't paying the rent, because there was nowhere for people to go. So it really depends on what's happening in the world, but I think that delayed justice can sometimes be a complete denial of justice, and so we have to always have our eye on getting the cases resolved. And I really do think that Monroe County has long been dedicated to making sure that happens. That doesn't mean there aren't some backlogs that need to be addressed, but I think I don't think we'll have any change with a new president judge. We will be continuing to stay on top of getting cases resolved in a timely manner.
And you mentioned a lot of people that you've worked with and have looked up to. Who would you say has inspired you the most? I mean, like law clerk or anyone?
Well, that's a tough one. When I was when I was in law school, I clerked for a law professor whose name was Tom Place, and He's a really renowned civil rights lawyer, and I learned a lot of great things from him. But probably the person who's been most influential in my legal life is Dominic Lockwood, who was my law partner when I stopped being a full-time public defender and started being a part-time public defender. It was because I went into practice with him, and he was a wonderful person. He had a liveliness about him that was unique, and when I would go to a conference in another city in Pennsylvania and say that I was from Monroe County, someone would almost always say, I know this guy. And I knew they were going to tell me a story about Dominic because he was a character. Yeah. He always wore 2 watches, 1 on each wrist. He had kind of wild hair. I guess I have kind of wild hair too. And he had a very happy outlook, and the practice of law can be really, really hard, and there can be a lot of, you carry a lot of other people's problems, and you're thinking about them all the time and trying to help solve them. And he just always managed to have a smile for everyone. He died kind of tragically in downtown Stroudsburg, and many of the people who wrote us like condolence letters and just talked about how he brought something into their lives, even people who signed their card a stranger. You know, they didn't really know him, but they knew him because he gave them a smile and some kind of joy every day just seeing him on the street. And he really taught me a lot of things about taking life seriously, but not so seriously that you're not enjoying it.
He's a true optimist.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And he would say, Thomas Jefferson was a lawyer and I'm a lawyer. Like he loved being a lawyer, and he didn't like anyone talking about the law as something like, why would you want to be a lawyer? Like, he never liked anyone saying that to someone. And I sort of feel the same way. I always tell people, if your child's considering being a lawyer, they should talk to me, because I would not discourage anyone from being a lawyer. It's an honorable profession if you practice it the way you should. And I get a lot of people coming back to me many years after I've represented them and thanking me for things that I've done for them. And it's a very rewarding profession, not just in a way that you're making a lot of money. It's more that you're doing something that's making a difference in people's lives, and many people are long appreciative. I get thank you calls on Thanksgiving from lots of different people, and it's very lovely.
Yeah. How do you feel about those people who have an indifferent view on law? Like, why do you think they have that?
Well, I think for the same reason that I talked about, that it is a hard thing to be involved in people's conflicts all the time. And I think that for judges, sometimes people work really hard to become a judge, and then they don't seem to like being a judge. They find the day-to-day complaints to be more than they want to deal with. And I mean, I'm not saying it's not going to happen to me, because I've never been a judge. I don't pretend to, even though I've been an arbitrator in cases, and I've maybe been a judge when I'm telling my clients maybe that's not the right way to go with this. I just think it's important that if you work as hard as we're working to try to get this job, that we plan to do it as well as we can do it, and maintain an attitude that's that's a little bit delightful. I think everybody needs a little more delight, and not so much
negativity.
Anger.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Monroe County has dealt with a very influx of people moving here for such a long time now. Everything from drug-related offenses have risen, and high-profile criminal cases. How would you, in your courtroom, handle serious cases, also addressing the root cause of crime in the community?
Well, I mean, I'm not really sure how much judges have to do with determining the root causes. I mean, I think that when I started working here as a full-time public defender and was handling juvenile cases, I felt like the parents of the child would come in and they would either blame the locals for being a particular way, or the locals would blame the new people who came from the city for being a particular way, meaning maybe someone who's just moved here thinks that the local kid was a bad influence on their kid, and the opposite. And I sort of watched that with some. I didn't have children yet at that point, so I didn't maybe know as much as I think I know now. But I do know that it wasn't one or the other. It was the clash of two different cultures that was causing some of the kinds of things. And when I started, really my main problem that involved juveniles was almost always burglaries, because there was a lot of second homes and kids would just break in and watch TV and have a pizza delivered or something. They weren't the kind of crimes we're dealing with now. And I have been involved in trials of homicide cases that were drug related, that were gang related. We have some very disturbing kinds of crime. I think that the rate is going down currently, and I think that that's certainly what we want to see happening. And I think that our prosecutors have done a good job with respect to gang violence and drug activity, but we still have a huge opioid problem, and our location, so close to New York City and so close to the interstate, makes us a place that a lot of people pass through and decide to stay, and they're not doing the kind of work we want to see happening in our communities. So, I think that we'll continue to prosecute cases and see them, see to those individuals being treated justly. But we are a beautiful community because of the values that the people who've lived here for a long time have, and we have to do what we can to preserve those values, and make it a safe place for families to want to be and to want to raise their children. And I think we're moving in the right direction, but I think that the justice system is the heart of what can keep this community a place that everyone wants to be.
So if elected, what is something you would want someone, whether it's a juror, a constituent, a prosecutor, anyone in your courtroom, to leave your courtroom with feeling? What is something you want them to remember you by if you do become judge?
Well, I don't want to lose my sense of humor. I think that having a sense of humor is a good thing, as long as it's not at the expense of anyone who's in the courtroom. I want to be seen as the kind of judge that I have very much enjoyed being in front of, the kind of judge who is patient and willing to be clear about what he or she wants. And I think that I've had the opportunity to be in front of judges in Monroe County who have really elevated what Monroe County is as a place to go to court. And I mean that in terms of the way that the sheriffs handle things in the county, the way that the staff in the courtroom treat one another and treat the people that come into court, including lawyers. And I just would want to be a person who everyone described as fair, and I will be demanding. I will want people to do what their role. If everyone does, my theory is that if everyone does their role the way it's supposed to be done, that's when we get to justice. If only one side is doing their role well and the other side is not, we might end up with someone in jail who shouldn't be in jail, or someone on the streets who shouldn't be on the streets. And I think that it's really important that we recognize that every person in the courtroom has a very distinct role, and I want to make it a place people don't dread coming. I want them to come to get things done that need to get done, and to leave feeling that they've been treated fairly and justly. I hope they'll think I'm a person of integrity.
That's great. Is there anything else you would like to add for potential voters?
May 20th, please get out there and vote. If you haven't learned enough about the candidates yet, certainly listen to the other podcasts, but also there is a YouTube available of the forum, and I think it's a good opportunity to hear each of the candidates and know who seems to be the kind of judge you'd like to go in front of. Thanks.
Thank you so much for being on here. My name is Catherine Pabon, and that was Z-Files Podcast with our special guest, Janet Jackson.
Thanks.
Thank you.